lot of school kids who are in like villages, even places where there are no schools. And those kids also have to be part of that history. If you don't think about building an institution where, like as I was saying, we pay for buses to go and bring the school kids. The buses is part of the infrastructure. You have to, the dissemination. You're not building something and you say that, oh, people didn't come and see it. But you also understand that the community that you are building it, like coming here in a village to build, and understanding that people in the village are not used to things like this. But through that, kids coming here and all that, it changes the way they think about the world. So in the next 10, 20, 15 years, 30 years, when they become adults, it will influence the way they think differently about the community or the society that they come from. Yeah. So basically that's it. So as we go through the institution, we realize there are different decisions that I've made regarding works that are here, the greenhouse, thinking about agriculture, food, and how all those things becomes extensions of art. And art, again, is not just because we've made a painting or sculpture or whatever. It's a way of life. And sometimes it's also like based on certain political conditions and forms. Art can even start from the premises of failure, like the railway line that you're standing on today. Now, it's the first railway line that had ever been constructed here in the north. Yeah. Since the British built the railway. And these lines are coming from 1890 to the mid-20th century. Because when the British built this, it was mostly in the south. That's what got in the Gold Coast. And along the mines, the Poland fields, and they were extracting resources, manganese, bauxite, and everything. The labor that went into these areas mostly came from the north. But the infrastructure, together with the wealth and everything, never reached there. That's why the north is very poor. Post-independence, you find someone like Kwame Nkrumah trying to build the silos and many other things. But even after his overthrow, all these infrastructures were abandoned. So Ghana is one of those places. So it's almost as if we're living in a shadow of ourselves. Yeah, we're living in a time even way before the independence era, in terms of ideology and all that. Yeah. So the idea of art through the institution and all the gestures that we are using here is supposed to somehow take from the premises of these failures and then open them up to other possibilities. Yeah. So sometimes as we're walking around, you might see that maybe there's a granite cellar, blah, blah, blah. Again, that's the whole point. Like you will not go to, let's say, the mausoleum and see a granite cellar walking. So the premises of the conditions that we're working with, all these things are part of it. So because in the previous regime, art was more about representation. Also, maybe a chef has done a food. We make a painting of the food. We are not really thinking about the political conditions of the food stuff. How did it come into being? The still life removes all of it. And the modernist institution, the institution is built, white walls. When you walk into the museum, you're supposed to forget everything that is outside. Yes. You are just supposed to think about the painting on the wall. But here, we are thinking about the disaster, the failure, everything comes together. So even as we're going along, like, oh, this thing is working, this thing doesn't work. Then we are discussing, all those things are part of art. Because the world is not, as we know, the world is not a smooth place, it's in chaos. So when we are building institutions, we really have to think about how that constantly, the institution also allows us to reflect on the political and the material conditions that exist in the real world. In traveling around the world and making all these artworks, it's very important that the work is somehow brought here or retained here. Because a lot of work in art, most works are made out of, let's say, art is mostly made in crisis. But mostly after it's done, the idea of the museum is that it cleans sometimes the crisis away from it and presents the work within a certain special context. And that's what I'm more interested in. Ways in which we can bring those forms that are coming from here that would have existed, let's say, within a Western context, within here. So that at least whilst we're experiencing the crisis and we're experiencing the objects that are born out of it, we can be able to have maybe varied conversations regarding art and also the many possibilities that can emerge from it. Yeah. So you realize that a lot of the works that I've made, which some of them are in museums around the world, a lot of them are in the institution. And sometimes I also make work just for this place because I want many children here to grow up with many examples, varied examples of art and culture, in such a way that in 20, 30 years' time, when they become politicians or scientists or whatever, it really influences the way they think about the world, or chefs, because my wife-to-be is a chef. So it's also really interesting thinking about ways that we're thinking about food and how it can be incorporated into experimentations of like art, temporality, smell, all those things. Yeah. Named after an artist who is also like an industrialist in Koforidua. He has a brick factory there. A few years, like in 2014, he, myself, and one of my professors from the university in Kumasi were having a conversation regarding building a studio out of bricks. And that was it. And then I started buying the bricks from him, we started making the designs, and then we started building this. So this was the first hall. The entire building was just this room, together with one other room next door. And then gradually, when I realized that I wanted to expand it from just being a home and a studio, because normally an artist studio is a place where the artist is alone in solitude to think and produce. But I like the idea that the artist studio could also be like, it's more like an archive, and also it's like a container of gifts in a way, because we are working with a gift economy. The idea that you're producing something, but you're not producing it for yourself, but you're producing it for an entire generation. And there are many objects around us that mostly we see but we take for granted. For instance, these shoemaker boxes, where shoemaker boxes in Accra and other places, Kumasi, that I collected over time. I know in Accra, when the shoe shiners come, they go around and collect all kinds of wooden objects, and they use that in order to be able to produce their boxes. When they are leaving Accra after their shoemaking, they leave it with other people, and those people would also take it, use it. Sometimes they'll give it to someone, the person will sell it. So I became really interested in it, the sound of it and everything. So I would go there and then negotiate with them, exchange, make new boxes for them, and then exchange, take the old boxes, because I'm interested in the idea of scarification when they hit the box over time, the breakages, how they repair them, because it's like the body. Later we'll see photographs of the skin in relation to like the history of like slavery, like the post-independence era, like the Kayes going to Accra and all that, how labor somehow became aestheticized within the body in terms of the markings, tattoos, and all those things. So some of the boxes are like fish crates that the women use at the seaside in Jamestown and others. Yeah. They store fishes in them. All that area that the Chinese operating now, the harbor, all these objects are coming from there. So this is like a memory of what that space used to be. And some of them are like blackboards from schools, which later you see that we have a work at the back, capital corpses with that. Some of them are canoes, some of the old canoes that were demolished. You see this, very thick boards. So I will take the canoes and I will reconstruct them. A lot of them also heavily. So you see that there's even an ice skating shoes. You know, at Jamestown, sometimes they take the ice skating shoes, and that's what they use to chop some of the fishes and all that. It's really interesting that in America and other places, it's used for skating, but here it's practical. They will sharpen it and then chop the head off. So there are ecological concerns also in it regarding the idea of the relationship between humans and, let's say, all these other life forms. How are we treating the planet, like overfishing, blah, 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 all those things are techniques that we use for fishing, for smoking fish and all that. Some of them are also boards that they use for smoking fish, like these ones. So you see that it's dark. So you see when you go to Cape Coast and others, the women that smoke the fish, they will put blankets on the fish, the thing, and then they'll put a wooden board on it. So all these are the blankets from the fish. But they are related to, I made them, it's another work titled A Grain of Wheat, but that was a work that was inspired by a project I did in Greece when I was living there many years ago. And the Second World War era, they had these medic stretchers that had been used when the German forces occupied Greece. And I was really thinking about ways in which the medical stretchers that they had used, that there were blood stains and other things in it, could be extended in relation to other life from marine life, because here in Ghana, the women would, when the foods is imported, they will buy it and then they will use it for fishing. So over years, the smoke, the fish blood, everything, the oil will turn it from white to black. So I'm really interested in the idea of time encapsulated within the material. So this time, it's not as if the stretcher is there and then a human being comes to lie on it and then a history is created. The history has been transferred, one smoking after the other, into the material. So the material is not the same bed sheet as it's what anymore. So it's like a painting, but this time the painting somehow is wrapped within, let's say, a certain system. So you realize that I make some of them large, small. So when you see them, they look like original objects. But these are things that I produced with people from Agbogboshi and all that. So timber markets, I work with blacksmith and other people. We made all the parts. The original work that I made is in England. It was traveling. It went to Australia and other places for exhibitions. But again, as I said, when I'm making work, I'm always thinking about how the context of it is here. Because in the previous regime, all these works that I make as an artist, there would have been, no one would be interested in showing this work. Because the way I think about art is sometimes in a system, like in a very traditional system, sometimes it goes a lot ahead of itself. So you need institutions that can contain that, and those institutions don't exist. So in order to be able to make it happen, you have to build the institution yourself. Yeah. So some of them, the core part of this work is some of the, you see these thema texts. So this, in relation to this, and many other components of the work, some archival documents and all that. These are, you know, in the 60s, in the 50s, Kwame Nkrumah was starting to build these buildings, factories around Tema and all that. Also, in the post, when Nkrumah was overthrown, a lot of these factories went downhill. A lot of them were abandoned, they were resold, the land was resold. The structural adjustment program in the 70s and 80s, when Ghana started going to the World Bank and IMF, we started selling off state properties, things like that. So when you go to Tema, there's an entire old factory there. There are archives in it, which you'll see later. There are wooden parts of the factory. They'll sell the machines and leave the entire wooden parts to rot. So I will go into the factory and then convince the security men to let me buy, to give them something and take the entire wooden components inside, and then we make them into like a work. So this is where they used to store the fire extinguishers and all that back in the 50s. So all these components, so it's almost as if it's a factory that had this sense of promise that was abandoned, and now we've collapsed it, we've taken it apart, made a work out of it. And this work, there are 3 versions of it. There's one in the National Gallery of Canada, there's one in America in a museum. So selling those 2 works alone was enough to build this entire structure. So then now we can put one of these works here so that an entire generation of young people can also experience it. Yeah. So it's also that thing about the component of art that sometimes something that is in decay, in art, it has the ability to transform it into another state of thing altogether. So something that you let society, let's throw away, the artist can take it and can transform it into something that is even more regenerative than when it was even alive before. Yeah. Now to build their own computers or things here in the airplanes and other things. So either in the airplane where we have the TV screens or here, we use them as independent because I designed the buildings in such a way that it doesn't require electricity to run, aside the TVs. So the whole month, we don't spend more than 700 cedis on electricity. But meanwhile, someone's room alone somewhere, he has 3 air conditions, like a month, 1,000, 2,000 Ghana. So because you also have to think about the economics of it. Skylights, there's light, so the work is always lit. So all those things are very important. There are no fans. It's open access. So air comes in, goes out by itself. It's naturally cooled by itself. The doors, when I designed them also with the old jalousies, like Legon design in mind. So I worked with the carpenters from Legon because they had worked there for several years and they had a lot of experience. So I went there and spoke to them because Ajiman Osei was also the head of the performing art department at Legon. So he put me in touch with one of the chief carpenters there, and we started designing the doors. And aside that also, I worked with the carpenters at KNUST to design some of the other doors and all that. So furniture, everything that you see here is very intentional, the way that we work with it, because I want something that is sustainable. The bricks, you don't need to paint it. When it gets dirty, you can just take a broom and sweep the walls. So, because here also in the north, we have issues with dust. Because the road, they are not even doing the roads and everything. The last time I saw one of my MPs about road access, he told me that this institution is not meaningful because it's a non-profit institution and I'll not go and build a hotel or restaurant or filling station or something and I'm spending money on school kids coming here. It doesn't make any sense. So you find a lot of these problems. We don't even have access to drinking water. They will not even give you, we don't even have drinking water. Like you can't get access to even the most and all that. Exactly. Yeah. The number of leg
miles.
Yeah. If we were to put it in the watch, the watch will explode.
Miles of steps. But these guys walk. And you know what I love about them? You see one walking up the streets coming, and he sees another one coming, but they don't give up. This guy has come from that direction.
I'll still go.
Let me tell you, let me still go. But you find one person.
So these works are also inspired by some. I bought some buildings from the States, like some of the silos. Like one of them is in Tamale here. It was also abandoned in the 60s. It was like, the Nkrumah silos, Valco. There were more than 20 versions built around the country. But even the food ministry doesn't have any record of it. Because when we were abandoned in 1966, in the Nkrumah, because Nkrumah was a socialist, he had aligned with the eastern bloc of Europe. So Ghanaians would go to, let's say, Yugoslavia, go to the USSR to study, Poland. So a lot of the old monuments in Accra were built by architects from the eastern bloc. Even like other buildings in Kumasi and others were all influenced by that. So at some point in Tamale, we have an area called the Russian bungalows. There were a lot of Russians living here. They were building the silo. The first airport in Tamale was built by the Russians. That airport, they don't use it anymore. Together with a lot of other infrastructure. So I was interested in that, in how it's encapsulated in some of these buildings. They accused Nkrumah that he was working with the Russians to build these nuclear bunkers. Because at the time, that was during the period of the Cold War. America and Russia, they were accusing Russia of building like nuclear weapons, blah, blah, blah. And this build, also because Nkrumah was notorious, he was a character. He arrested some political opponents and put them in jails. So that part of his history also allowed for those stories to be believable. So when the buildings were abandoned, the one in Tamale, it started growing ecosystems. There were fishes in the water. It started going in the building. It's deep underground like this, aside the top. So it has a full concrete building built but never completed. And then bats started living in the building. Snakes, fishes, whatever. Stories started building. People would go there to fetch water in the dry season, women and children. Because a patriarchal society, Ghana, how many times do you see men going to fetch water? So sometimes they'll slip and fall in the water, they'll drown. So over time, about 10 people recorded died in the building. So it was called Nkrumah Volini. It means Nkrumah's dungeon. But it's also like a void. So I was thinking about the conceptual premises of it. When I started my PhD, I was looking at, let's say, the idea of philosophy in connection to, let's say, these systems of failure and things like that. So I started going there, photographing the bats. But also when we excavated the building, I didn't want to get rid of the bats. That was during COVID. And also, if you think about what humans have done to the planet, it's unbelievable, even in the last 200, 300 years. And in 1966, when the building was abandoned, at the time, half of the species in the world that are extinct now were not extinct at that time. So people were saying, why don't we get rid of the bats? And I said, no. The bats are not the problem. We are the problem, So also thinking about ways in which we could preserve the ecosystems in the building so that we could, for instance, in the future, we could grow food on top of the building where the bats can come out. Because they're fruit bats, they can eat the fruits, they can go back in the building. So it's almost as if the building which was abandoned, which was meant for storing, let's say, food that was going to be grown in the north and then sold to Europe at a fair price, and then the capital will be used in developing this place over decades and generations. The failures of it now inspires us to think about new ways in which we can think about ecological relations and things like that. So sometimes you realize that because the Ghana Railway sign is with the eagle, I also like to combine that together with like the bats and also the image, like the archive photographs of the workers from the railway, the labor that went into the building of the railway in the early 20th century, and how that shaped also what it means to be a Ghanaian. Because the independence of Ghana heavily also can be attributed to the workers at the railway workers. Yeah, because they had the biggest union and the strongest union in Ghana. And I think, honestly, systematically, the government over the years crippled the railway just to kill the union. Because back in the early 90s and all that, all those protests and everything that was strikes, the railway union, once they led it, they shut down. But now the railway union is not strong anymore. So that's why when there's a strike, everything can be killed immediately. But when these guys were there, they could hold the government to ransom and shut the entire country down. Yeah. So some of them also are papers. So you see the Gihok. So these are papers also from the same factories that I produced some of the works from. And yeah, original archives. But because I'm thinking about drawing in a state that, or maybe the, what's the name? The writings and other things on the drawings. I'm thinking of them as extensions from the papers as drawing extensions. So as an artist, you don't necessarily need to now come and then draw a human being on it. The idea of time, the human condition and everything, as he was talking about, the number of people that have worked with the boxes and all that, it's all encapsulated within this. And you know, a lot of clay is also, paint is produced out of clay and all that. So even I have the original documents at the time when they were writing letters to the villages about clay access to build a factory. All those things were abandoned in the factory, and they were setting them on fire. Ghana Films, when it was sold to the Malaysians for TV3, they brought out all the films and then they set it on fire. So that's the country that we live in. So when you are thinking about, our generation, when we're thinking about the work that we do, we have to think about it in relation to preservation and all that. And I think food is also one of the most important points, because it allows us to rethink about, let's say, even economic decisions that we make, like production systems and all that. So food is one of the things that really allows, because there are a lot of artists in the world who just work with food and the politics of food, production systems of food. Like, so if you're a chef and you're working, you're cooking, it's not just that you went to buy the ingredients from the market, but where are the ingredients coming from? How were they made? What are the systems connected to it? All those things are very important. Even the way the food is cooked, how it is served, the infrastructure around it and all that. Yeah. So as we go along, I'll come more specifically into that side. We'll go to the greenhouse and the kitchen that we're building and all that. Okay. So you see, sometimes when I'm walking in town and I see something interesting, I'll just buy it and come in. Because you know, at the back of, when you notice the yellows, yes, at the back, they hang some dolls, and sometimes I find them so interesting. So I'll take a picture and then I'll try to replicate it. And then I'll see an interesting shoe in town, buy it. So, because pop culture, because sometimes when the kids come here and they see things like Avengers bag on it, so there are things that you need to draw them in. There are highlights within the work that sometimes when parents come and they see, they're like, oh, this is so interesting. So there are different points that allows for different conversations and all that within the work. So these are those components. So you see the tires or these tattoos on their hands. But aside the era of slavery, also the people moving from the north, like my grandfather, for instance, he was one of many people that walked from the north all the way to Accra to find greener pastures. This is like almost 100 years ago. So he was a chef, and he worked for the British colonial administration. So he used to travel with this white man who was his master, whatever, at those days. And he used to cook for him. He was his personal cook. So my father was born in Accra, and then my father decided, when my father was 6 years old, his father brought him to the north, and then that's how he grew up here. But I'm really interested in this system, because the Kayais, when they come, they write their names on their bodies and all that. And it's from that system where people would migrate in case they died in an accident on the road. That was a way to identify where they were coming from, things like that. So that is a political condition. You will not find that in other countries or all that. Because when people are documented, their DNA, blah, blah, blah. But of course, there are new systems that have come in. But back in the day, even till now, so that's why I always say Ghana is living in its own shadow. So I'm interested in how this is connected, for instance, to the charcoal bags. I buy the charcoal bags from the charcoal sellers, but there are bags that the Ghana Cocoa Board will import. They will use them for what? Cocoa once. And then afterwards, only once, because by the policy of cocoa internationally, you can't use the bag more than once. So after once, they will discard the bags. The middlemen, Zamama men will buy it. They will sell it to the charcoal sellers, the onion sellers, rice sellers, whatever, kinky. But the thing is that because those things are produced locally, the international market doesn't care about how you use it. So that's when it starts coming alive. The women will write part of their names on the bags. So that's why in Ghanaian culture, you find that people's homes, plates and other things, they mark it with the names. It's all coming from those histories. So I'm interested in those relationships between that. And also how when the object is presented, when kids come here, they also like to touch and all that. So the object is also accumulating new memories. It's a photograph, all right, but it's also like the box with the marks and everything on it. In a museum, you'll never see this. Everything has to be clean. You can't touch it, you know. But here, when the kids come, they're curious. They want to touch and everything. So the work itself has to lend itself to, in a Western institution, it would be like, oh, this work is damaged. Let's change it. But for me, it's even getting more alive and more exciting because it is connecting to the community or the society that you find it in. So you see some of the shoemaker boxes, the different types. So I started taking these photographs in 2014, even before this building was made, and even before this work, non-rentable, was made. And you can see like the holes and the things that I was talking about. So these relations between the body and then everything, then from there, we start looking at other forms. We have videos of artists, international artists. Let's get disorganized.
Okay. Yeah, we have the...
So these videos are of artists internationally, and yeah, well, the idea is that when the school kids come here, also for a moment we can have snippets of these videos, things like that. Sometimes there are certain lectures that I give in the parliament, which will go shortly. We take the TV to the parliament, and then I give a lecture to university students, whoever, and they'll bring the TV back. Yeah. So the idea is that things can evolve, change, and all that. I like the spontaneity. You realize that at the top, in the corner, there's a bird nest there. So that's the thing also that in a Western museum you'd never see. So here, because the birds are flying in at night, the owls will come and settle here. Sometimes they'll grab some of the birds, eat them, spit them out. You come in the morning, there's an entire bird which is like half digested on the floor. So how do you? So sometimes you see bird poop white on it. So all these memories in relation to the architecture is also very important. So we are not building institutions that somehow separate life from it. Life itself has to be part of the foundational structure of it.
It keeps evolving.
Yes.
When I first walked in, I thought they were the umbrellas.
Umbrellas. No. These ones. So you see, this box was one of the most interesting ones I liked. Kakra Ebedinti. This one there doesn't apply to the politicians. They don't do kakra Ebedinti. It's not no kofio. Theirs is no kwabu.
It would be ironic that somebody who's a big boy now in Europe somewhere, his box is
Exactly, yes. Because I've met a lot of people in Europe
Belgium, all
who had to go through the Mediterranean and all that.
I know one guy who went to Greece and met a girl in the port in Greece where he was working for 2 years.
Okay.
She won the lotto to US and she put him on, and that's how he came to America.
Okay.
He walked from Ghana, starting from Kishima. Stayed at some place called Tripoli Hotel in Winter.
Yeah.
And his wife won the lotto. Wow. Charlie, your eye opening.
So you can just sit anywhere.
I hope I won't sink.
So this space is called the Parliament of Ghosts. And it's called the Parliament of Ghosts because of the crisis and things I was talking about. Working at the railway and also taking inspiration from different points, collecting objects. Labran, it because I took all the cabinets that the British had made here in the early 20th century in the railway, the decaying materials, took it back there and built a parliament that was decaying out of it. But after just that, in mid-2019, just before COVID started, I decided to build the work as an architectural form component. You know, sometimes when you make a work of art, it's a work that can move from one place to the other, like the non-rentable. But this one, I decided that I was going to build it into the ground. It will never go anywhere unless the world comes to an end or the building is destroyed or whatever, the space is destroyed. So we have debates here, discussions, film screenings. As you can see this screen, we had it for some months now. So we have large-scale cinema projectors that so we show films, local films. There are a lot of guys here, OBL and many others, who make really interesting local films. We screen their films, we invite them to discuss their films to the public. We go to communities to show their films. I also produce like different works like that one, which is called Birds of Dreams. I made it during COVID period. It was made for a museum in Italy. And here I wanted to make it in a very expanded form. So it's made up of cement papers. And you know when the masons, when we're building, they always make huts of the papers and they carry concrete. So I'm also thinking about the load of labor in just the representation of the paper. So why not make a library just of the cement paper huts? If you have 1,000 cement paper huts, you can imagine the number of labor that has gone into building an institution or whatever. And because our institution is more geared towards school kids, I'm more interested in how they can experience the labor component of an institution, of anything. So some of them are also works of art that you find in museums around the world that are here in storage, but also as works in themselves. The beds, the structure itself were student beds that were in, there were student beds that were in, for instance, what's the name, the wood market in Kumasi, Sokobine. They had made it, the government had commissioned them to produce it for a school, but they never went for them. And after years, they started burning them, and someone saw it and then told me about it, one of our colleagues. And then we bought it in 2016 or so, and I'd kept it for many years until I started designing this space, and I said, okay, that component could be part of it. So you see that sometimes parts of it are burnt and all that. So I don't try to alter it or anything. I leave it as they were in the original state. I made a work with it in Italy, which currently we're shipping back to Ghana. So when the museum expands, we'll have more and more and more artworks. The idea is that the institution is supposed to have works that, for instance, in the next 30, 40 years, it will be worth an entire fortune, because most of these works, I sell some of the works in order to build this institution. But if I could have sold all those works and just have money, but it doesn't make sense to me. The idea is that you keep a lot of the works so that in 100 years to come, it also creates another wealth altogether, because in 100 years to come, some of these works, like one of them alone, could be taken out, and that could build an entire institution, because the wealth of an artwork changes and increases over time. So the Parliament of Ghosts somehow holds the ghost of time and memory of history, but it also has a future in it. Or you are more thinking about the future and then using that in order to be able to make the choices that you are making now. There is a series that we've made here called the Parliament of Ghosts series. And that series is mostly we've grown like corn in here. We've built all kinds of structures here that normally don't make any sense. But that's the whole point of it. The idea that the parliamentary form is supposed to hold, there's a work that we made. Let me see. Yeah, there is maybe this man, there's an image here. Later, maybe, before you go, I might show you on the archive, on my archive. So this is it, you see. So this is the same space. Yeah. So it's, just a minute. Okay. Thank you. Yeah. So this is the straw that they weave. When you go to the villages, you realize the walls are made of it. Historically, when you're going to someone's home, that was the first thing you encountered. So that is one. There are many other forms also that we've done in here. This was, okay. Yeah. Okay. So growing food inside a space. So even the idea of the growing of the corn and other things inside a space inspired the building of the greenhouse and thinking about building the kitchen for experimentation of food, spices, and things like that.
So the failure of the parliament
gives birth to new life. Yeah, the failure of the parliament. So the Parliament of Ghosts is because ghosts they transcend the body. They can go anywhere. Ghosts are not because something has died. A ghost can be something from the future. It's like an apparition, an idea that is haunting you because you haven't done it. Do you realize that thing that sometimes, I have to do this thing, I have to do this thing. It hasn't happened yet, but the unrealizing of it is haunting you. So you don't need, it's only in Ghanaian films that someone dies, not then a ghost to come out. Azonto ghost. Come and dance Azonto. So, but the idea of ghosts goes beyond that. There is a film, The Space Odyssey, And also Christopher Nolan, this director that made this new film, Oppenheimer, he made an old film, Interstellar, where the world is coming to an end and they send a group of scientists and astronauts to go and look for life elsewhere. And then the one who pilots the plane, Cooper, he doesn't even know that. He didn't realize that he was his future self was the one that had sent the message to him in the past. So the idea of time has always been in a loop. What will become has always been or could shift. You know, the ideas of time with regards in how maybe sometimes even just decisions that we make regarding objects and all that could shift the course of history and all that. So the Parliament of Ghosts allows a parliamentary body that lets ordinary objects which are dying of, like cement papers, scales, fuel pumps. We've even mounted an airplane inside here, like all kinds of things. So it's like they don't make sense, but that's the point of art. Art is not to make sense. If we're to rely on the idea of sensible people, the world would not be what it is today. But the world is in chaos. Every politicians always say, oh, we are the best people to lead you. We are the sensible people. The world is in crisis. Sometimes just a bit of senselessness and stupidity sometimes can open up other trajectories within the world. And that's what sometimes the original ideas of, let's say, thinking about, socialism and other things, the idea of redistribution could also bring across. We will go to the back where we have the capital corpses, and then from there we go through the cinema, the library, then the greenhouse. Yeah.
Okay. So after that, we come back to
a few pictures. I have a proposal I need to send to some of the neighboring environment. For instance, going to see a local MP or whatever, and he says, oh yes, I will help support or whatever. Like you can imagine, all these, you guys are here.
Okay.
But you can imagine that there are all these, for instance, the Minister for Culture, he's from here. Yeah, but he's never been here before. Yeah, my MP has never been here before. My assemblyman has never been here before. So you realize, so it's like we as young people, they always say that the country, we are designing the country for young people. But they really don't care about any young people. Maybe the young people are their children or other people. So even if I'm doing all of this and I'm not getting support, how much more someone who's just finished university?
Exactly.
So that's where the problem, for me on my own, I really sometimes don't care. But if you're thinking about the system and what they're like, what these decisions or ignorances does to an entire system, it's a disaster. That's why you find that young people will rather sacrifice their lives. They'll rather die in the Mediterranean. They'll rather risk their life to cross the Mediterranean than to stay on the continent. They'll rather go through the desert and all that. So all these things, for me, I would keep coming back because each time I travel, I'm always dying to come back because I'm like, oh, I travel, I see some like, oh, Charlie, maybe in Tamale we can do something even more better. But it doesn't really... But it's also because we are not doing it for the politicians. We are doing it for the community. So for me, that's my main point.
At which point did that dream of arts get into you? Like, let me start this thing. At which point? Is that your teenage stage when you're going to...
No, it was in university. I started reading philosophy books, things. And we had mentors also in the school, in Kumasi, at the art department, who were very, very supportive, encouraging, like thinking outside the box, things like that, or even doing things that ordinarily you might not do. So teachers like that were the things that really got me thinking.
You know Jody?
Yeah.
His father is in the picture there.
Okay.
In the middle.
He used to work.
His father was head of railways.
Okay.
Would you say Nkrumah's story also inspired?
Yeah, of course. Nkrumah is like one of our greatest champions.
Ever.
Yeah, ever. Yeah.
Nkrumah has echoed throughout the whole West.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Mr. Abraham, what is the secret behind you and kids? Because the first time I heard about you, I went online, read, I saw the brochures of the place and stuff. I saw kids. There was a content about kids. And all this while, it's just children.
Children.
And
that's the whole point, because children are the future.
Forgive me if I say, maybe you've not even started being your own parent.
Exactly.
For now. But you're just concerned about kids.
Yeah. You don't need to have children to realize that the future of any society depends on children growing. And their minds are open-ended. They think so openly. They don't have any sense of judgment or anything. They are no prejudice. They are just curious. They are just excited and all that. A few days ago, when we go into the green, I'll show you this picture. It was so interesting. So where we are going now, when we get there, I'll show you this picture. But Yeah. So this inside the greenhouse where we have the trains. Imagine when we went to the kids. They were so excited. Already they jumped onto the trains.
They didn't need your permission.
Yeah. But adults, when they go there, you know, they are, But imagine the kids are so excited. And they are coming from villages where they've never seen a train.
And might never see a plane in their life.
So imagine the introduction of this alone opens up all these possibilities and all that. So for me, it's like it might be something that is in decay, but the decay opens up a portal for new thinking. The decay, yeah.
What's that? The breakthrough moment of your life. That's breakthrough.
Oh, I don't know.
You don't know.
I've always been curious about the world. Me, I'm like I always like to think that I'm still a child and I'm just exploring. I'm not willing to lose anything. People are so concerned about what they accumulate and what they keep. For me, I'm not interested in those things. What I get, I let it go. The more you have and the more you let it go, the more things come. More things come to you. And if you don't have any sense of losing anything, then you cannot be corrupt also. Because the reason why people are corrupt is because they want to keep and keep and keep accumulate. Yeah, accumulation. Capitalism is a terrible thing. It's a disease. Yeah, the more you want to accumulate, the more greedy you become. Yeah. But when you're building systems and all that, it doesn't really. You are not burdened with, oh, let me try to impress society or let me try to build this image or whatever.
A collection of blackboards.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
So this space is titled Capital Corpses, this work. And I made this work, I originally, Accra, going to the schools, Newtown, Jamestown, other places. And then a lot of the old schools, the desk that they were using, a lot of them were in really bad shapes. And they needed replacements. But it's difficult to get a replacement in the public schools. So I produced new desks for them, and then I'll take the old desk. I used to collect these machines. I collected over 2,000 of them because I wanted to make a site-specific work with it. And then I started thinking about ways in which I could combine the desk, the machines that were decaying, together with the old desk. And these machines, I'll get like the tailors who use these machines, and then they will lubricate it and bring it back to life. They are old machines which are rusted, so the parts are so hard. So that's why they make those. I'm going to start it, your hand. So you see the inside, because when something is working, we don't pay attention to it. When something breaks down, that's when we begin to, it's like the shop of the mechanic, where the mechanic, you see him under the car, like, when it's like a system. When a system is working, people think, but when there's serious crisis, like when COVID came, the entire world shut down. So why can't we always think that the world has always been in crisis? We don't need like an epidemic for the world to shut down. Even human relations, in relation to systems that we built and all that, all these things have been part of the pandemics that we've been experiencing all these centuries. Yeah, in human history. And also like say in our relationship to ecological forms and all that. So for me, the idea of like bringing these machines back to life with the motors and everything, with the sound, like the boxes, the shoemaker boxes, since I didn't include that in it, the machines, it's like they're like zombies. It's like when you watch these zombie movies where the zombies come back to. So I'm really interested in all that systems. And there's a relationship also between the machines industrially and also the railway. Because some of the materials that were used in producing these machines in England and other places were the same materials that were used in producing the railway lines. So you can see that these desks are from schools here. The blackboards also, I will produce new blackboards, but those ones are whiteboards. Because these days the schools want the white marker boards. So I'll produce a new one, give it to them, and take the old one. But again, like the archives from the Gayhawk factory with the text on it, we leave the text on it. So I'm interested in what the school kids are learning in school. But at the time we took it, we tell them don't clean the board because the memory comes along with it. So someone, when you read them, they are very interesting. We're like, hey, really, they are really teaching this in school. But they are really, yeah?
It's quite recent.
Yeah, it's quite recent, 2023. So I like to preserve it. The original ones that I had made currently is in Brazil. A museum bought it in Brazil. And sometimes I'm like, even Brazil, like they are interested in works that we are doing here. They are buying it for there. And then in Ghana, zero. So if I didn't build, because I started building this space in 2018, if I hadn't built this space, it meant that this work would not be shown here. So it's also the relationship between building and all that. The windows were done by an Ewe guy in Accra. There's a space in Accra, La Maison. You see the glasses, they are like this. So I went there one time and I spoke to the owner and I said, who made your things for you? He did it so well. So he put me in touch with the guy. The guy, we brought him, he did an original work for us and subsequently this. But unfortunately, when he was doing this work, because the contract was so big and he had to produce the entire thing, he had money to buy land in after Tema to start doing this. And someone did him juju. Someone buried medicine on the land and then he died. So the work was halfway and then we had to get someone else later. It took almost 2 years to get someone else to finish the work. So it was just finished recently. So a few months old. Yeah. Yeah, but it's part of the system that you live in, you know. It's part of it. But we're lucky because when he died, his wife, we knew about his illness and all that. And then it was back and forth. The church, the medicine, everything. Like hospital-wise, he was fine. There was nothing wrong with him. But his body kept bloating and bloating and bloating. And then through the church, he was getting better than then herbal medicine. And then to come back again. So when he died, his wife called us and said, look, he told us about the work he was doing for you, blah, blah, blah. So you have to wait. We have to pour libations on the land and do rituals, blah, blah, blah. So it took a long time. So even just the idea of spirituality and everything also, it's embedded within the work that you do. You can't avoid it. Okay. So where you came from the road, all that land after is part. The land beyond is part of it. Inside their farms, their industrial areas, their forest areas, all kinds of spaces. These 3 buildings, one of them belonged to one of my neighbors. At the time, someone told him that we're building a beer factory here because this building was so big. He didn't understand why someone would come and build a building like that. And I met him and told him that it wasn't a beer factory. He was interested in selling his land to us and the building so we could expand the institution. So based on that,
He did sell it.
Yeah, he did sell it to me. So I didn't want to demolish it. There were some other buildings I had demolished, but this one, he had built it well. But I wanted to preserve it and then extend it. So we built newer versions of it, but the newer versions were expanded, so they are story buildings. So the down part are accommodation with a kitchen on each building, and the top part is a studio. So it means that if someone is a writer, a poet, a chef, cook, a physicist, he wants a place to come, you just call us and say, hey, look, I'm coming to the north, I want to come and do a research. We're like, okay, yeah, we have a bed. We always have to make sure that there are rooms available. We have a bed for you. You come and stay here. You don't have to pay anything, but what you have to pay is your time. Like you do a workshop with school kids here, maybe you're a chef, or maybe you will invite school kids, you do some cooking, some recipe or something. So I like the idea that through the building of an institution, it can allow for redissemination of forms, or intelligent forms, different intelligences and all that. So we'll also, eventually the idea is to have like a proper university here in the future, dedicated to like architecture, art, engineering, other things. So like just creative thinking. Physics, why can't we combine physics with art or engineering, things like that. So at least when we have spaces like this, residencies, we need to build more. So some of the trains will also serve as those purposes. Because I'm converting the trains also into living spaces and all that. So that at least people can come, stay, and share all these intelligent forms that they have.
And the airplanes too should do that.
Yeah, the airplanes too, there will be living spaces in them.
Some of them have not traveled in airplanes.
I started building the parliament together with this building. It's only last year that I roofed it. So from 2019 till now that we started building, like late 19. And this area will be a library. So the library contains books that I've collected from all around the world. There's also artworks incorporated into it. The archive that we currently have will be moved here. incorporated into the library, and then we'll use that place as a welcome center in the near future. So I also studied photography when I was living in Germany at some time, like 5 years ago. So the photographer who was teaching me, he had studied in Düsseldorf, and in Düsseldorf they have this art school, which was one of the most prominent art schools for photography. They were the ones that introduced art, photography into art proper. Before, photography was separate, you know, from art in a way, and more like documentary and other things. So analog photography, you see back in the day, the large cameras that we're using and all that. So I was studying that system. So the idea is to somehow be able to build also a photography studio here that we can also train young people to relook. Because when you're using those cameras, it takes time. It's not like just your cell phone that crack. It takes time just to compose the image, shots and all that. That's why when you see the railway images and all that, they are so good. Because those days, it took so much time. So you just had one shot. Of course, digital also presents you with other possibilities. But I like the idea that through the older technological forms, we can also do things differently. Yeah. And you see the floor is terrazzo. Yeah. So like simple forms, things that you can clean easily. So they are road signs that were going to be discarded, and they've been there for like decades. This is from the agriculture department. So we're going to build these irrigation systems here, and when it's done, the floor is going to be done finally. Everything is going to be brown, and you have like the nets coming through, which reduces the light. We'll have a path here, like a runway for catwalk. There are a lot of fashion people here who do, so they can use it for their fashion shows and all that. And we'll have the train seats all around, but in between you have even still plant beds and other things. Because I like the idea that even when we are growing food, because the spices, all the old local plants that were growing in the villages, that when you go to the village, the women there might be the ones using those ingredients and all that. How do we bring that into the contemporary setting? Also because they have different colors. There are different flowers and things that sprout out of that. So even when it's here and you're looking at it, it's like a painting. So art has that, because we are thinking about it within that sense, it has all those abilities and all that.
It's a collage of seeds.
Exactly. Yeah. So I also like the fact that when we have the shade and other things here, for instance, in the evening we can have lectures here. We can, when it's done finally, aside that, we can have screens that come out and retract. We can do film screenings in here. So it's like all the different spaces present different experiences. The library will also have TVs there where you can watch maybe films in private settings. The cinema has its quality. The parliament has its quality. The other space has its quality. This has its quality. So it's like, it's a single idea, but you're trying to produce it in multiple different forms as possible. So it's not always singular. Yes, exactly.
Do you have a water body around here? Since you talk about irrigation,
we have a reservoir system that we built, and we're going to build more to harvest rainwater, things like that. But for now, the reservoir that was built was mainly meant for like using in the institution. For a long time, the parliament was gathering water when we hadn't roofed it. So that was what we used in, for instance, building most of the space here. We didn't have to buy water. But once we roofed it, that was cut. So now we have to go back into finding other systems. So we are still waiting for the agric experts we are working on with. She's going to come and turn the soil. And then we don't use fertilizers or anything. Yeah. So we are using cow dung and others. And the cows always come through here. So when they poop, we carry their things and we come and throw it in here.
So will you be open to maybe having livestock rearing as part of the
livestock?
Yes.
I haven't thought about that one.
Because if you plan to use like the dung or the manure,
well, as for that one, you find it plenty in the environment. In the north there, this place is the home of cow dung.
But I don't plan to have a structure to house like animals.
I don't know yet. Maybe in the future it might be possible, but so far I haven't thought about it. I don't want the vegans and the vegetarians to come after me. I'm talking about protecting ecosystems. So I'm like, okay, yeah, something you have to be very careful politically. So you also see that we have one of the trains also in the building. So the idea that the food can also grow on the train, inside the train, and all that is also important, because these trains are also part of the ghosts and the memories that we're talking about time. Because these were used in the mines for transporting bauxite, gold, and others. So now they bear witnesses to the history of time. So if we're going to combine that together with these radical forms that we're working with, I think that it opens up new possibilities and new meanings regarding how we read things. Yes, yes. Yeah, also that. And also, that's why we've left these blank, like we made some parts concrete. So we can also use those places for cooking and workshops and other things. But we're also building kitchens, like on the other side, the foundation, we're building a kitchen where that kitchen will purely be for experimental cooking. So we can invite chefs or cooks to come take some of the things that we're growing here or in villages and others, or even bring their own recipes, do workshops with school kids, even recipes with like local women. The local women will come, they'll cook with them, they'll learn new things, they'll impact new things. So the idea is that it's supposed to be a space that allows for both intergenerational and also interclass, but also intercultural sharing. So because if we don't build systems like this, even imagine in Ghana, the entire country wouldn't even have a national recording studio. No. Where as a musician you can go and just...
Yeah.
But meanwhile, they invest so much money into music awards and all. So there is, like, the entire system is built on nothing.
Meanwhile, the ones in Nkrumah built rather the one at Ghana Films.
Yeah.
That auditorium, and then there's an underground studio at GBC, which is not used. And GBC, you can see that in the 60s, it was a world-class place for what it still has now.
No, even the machines and things, digital, the systems that they have, a lot of countries don't have those.
In the 60s, it was one of the most first-class places in the world.
I bought one of the old Ghana Airways planes, which I'm yet to bring here. And it's interesting that those planes, back in the day, when you used to fly to, what's the name? When you were flying to Düsseldorf, New York and other places, in the winter, when they got there and there was complete fog and most planes needed visibility to land, Ghana Airways had the planes that could auto-land themselves. Back in those days, Ghana had those technologies in their planes. Those planes were special. And when Ghana Airways was going bankrupt, why didn't they bail it out? And at the time, Ghana Airways needed just $1 million. But they bankrupted it and they sold all the lands that came with it to themselves. So that's why when you go to Roman Ridge these days, you see these apartments and it's a fucking mess. Yeah, it's a really bloody mess. So when we are thinking about building, the radical forms and all these things have to somehow really go back into it with regards to, let's say, rethinking about future generations and all that. You see one? Yes. So, but these are just plants that are growing by themselves. But when we turn the soil and we start the proper one, you'll see all kinds of really amazing plants. There are more than 50 different plants that we're going to grow in here. And as time goes on, we're going to build more greenhouses and all that. Because some of the land is just going to be used for just open farming and all that. And the village folks are already just farming there by themselves. It's not like in America where, because you have a land, someone will come and say that, oh, this is my property or whatever. No, it doesn't work that way. So we're going through the train side, the planes, and then we are literally done. And then maybe we can see some of the photographs in the archives, drawings, and other things.
Bobo. Okay. So you project from, please, so this train. Then we proceed from there.
All aboard. Yalla. Second.
All right.
No, this is a passenger plane.
This is a locomotive. It's an engine. Yeah. Okay. So this train is made in Kassel, in a town called Kassel in Germany. Yeah. And Kassel, during the Second World War, Hitler used there as his military base. That's where they were producing all the bombs and others for the Nazis. When American forces came in, they destroyed the entire town. That was one of the first spaces that they destroyed. So later on, when the company, when the town was rebuilt, this company was one of the companies that built trains that were used in like the colonies and also newly post-independent countries. And Ghana bought a lot of these trains in the 70s and 80s. That was what was used for both in the mines and also for the passenger trains and all that. Because the trains itself, when the British built them, were meant for mineral resources extraction and all that. But later on, in Rawlins's regime, they brought some of these trains for passengers, blah, blah, blah. So I'm just interested in the relationship between the history of, let's say, Kassel in relation to the Second World War and the devastation of Europe in relation to the rest. Because again, a lot of soldiers came from here to go and fight in Europe and all that. So if we're thinking about that in relation to these machines and then the greenhouse and everything that we're building, what does it represent or what does it mean? And you see, this is also a very important detail here. LDS05. So these are the numbers that they give to the trains or objects when they are going to demolish them or scrap them. So this means that this thing was not supposed to be here. It wasn't meant to be alive.
It's supposed to be destroyed.
Yes. And also this line, when they are going to cut with this train, they will cut them into pieces. So some of them, when I bought them, they had been cut into several pieces. And I had to look for the welders who had cut them into pieces. We paid them, and then they welded the trains back together again. Because I was just interested in preservation rather than destruction. But then the marks and all that. So sometimes they might scratch it in order to reveal the metal to cut through it or something.
So they smelt them?
Yeah, they sell. So when you buy iron rods these days, it's out of all the old remnants of like objects, industrial things, Valco. And Valco, interestingly enough, was a space that was a company that was built out of the Akosombo Dam. Because at the time when Nkrumah needed money to build a dam, the Americans gave money. And the excess power at the time, because Ghana was only 4 or 5 million people, the excess power was supposed to create an industry. And that's how Tema was born. And when Tema was built, Valco, the excess power was sent there. So they would use it to produce aluminium, steel, and other things. But today, all the things that Nkrumah built are sent to Valco to melt down. So all these contradictions we have to think about.
So where was this train? Where was it?
In Sekondi.
Sekondi, railways.
Yeah, railways.
Yeah. Up a picture of railways.
I've been going there for almost 10 years trying to get it. Yeah, railways. Yeah, local shed.
So he did the 250 classes.
Okay.
He designed a braking system.
For this one. Yeah.
So
I was doing a lot of research into the braking systems and all that, taking photographs of them.
But they never gave him, because he was a black man, they never gave him the...
This must be heavy.
You know, it's like this train is about 40,000 kilos.
So you have to
crane, crane. It's very expensive and difficult to transport. And they had these old German cranes at the railway that we had to use, because in Sekondi, because of the oil, it's expensive to rent cranes there. They quote the prices in dollars. A day is like $10,000 or whatever. If you not rent it, an oil people will come and rent it. So we had to rely on the railway people, the old cranes that are that the British installed. We had to use those cranes to lift the trains and then let the trucks come in, and then even the trucks would get stuck on the railway line. We had to bring the crane and lift the truck and the train. It was a lot of work. It took 1 week just to lift them, and then no more than a week just to lift them on the trucks and then bring them to Tamale. Yeah.
When they come here,
and to assemble them and all that. And this one, we built the line. The railway workers from Sekondi came to build the line. Everything, we put the thing, we brought the crane, they lifted the train on a truck. The truck came here, they lifted the crane again, put one part of it just on the line, and the workers tied the train with a rope, and then we pulled the train into the space. Yeah. And we've made videos and films of all of this. So when you see it, it looks very unreal. But all those, I just like the idea that, like, something that is meant for demolition, we create all these new systems out of it that when kids see, they are so fascinated. Wow, like, so someone actually went through all this trouble just to create this image. That's just the point, the power of imagination, that you just think that, oh, what if we could have a train in a greenhouse? The thinking of it is the easy part too. But the doing, but that's the fun is where the doing is. The fun is where the doing is. Though it might be difficult and chaotic, that's where the fun is. Today we are talking about it, it seems so easy and all that, but Charlie, at the time where if you were here, like, mind busting. The local shed, they have the old foundry and the chimney. There are plants growing on top of the chimney. So I thought it's an interesting paradox that on the chimney, because sometimes when you go there, even in the train, the abandoned trains, you find that there are food plants, the cassava that they grow there is growing through part of the train and all that. So I thought that was really interesting. Of course, aside inspiring the greenhouse and all that, but I was interested in making a work of art out of it. And the work, of course, you couldn't transport the chimney from here there. So what I did was that we went to Texas. There's a scrapyard where they sell different kinds of objects from different spaces that they've taken from the ground. And I went to select this one, and it was very expensive. This structure was $50,000. Yeah, so I was commissioned by an institution in New York to produce this work. It's called a High Line. It's an old train line in New York that is not underground or underground. It's overground. They've built the metals, and it goes over the city. And today they've turned it into a museum where in a year more than 10 million people go to see. So they commissioned an artist to do a work that sits there for a year. And I wanted to make this work. So for them, you want to make it happen. It's the city of New York. 10 million people come every year, and they make billions out of just people coming there. So they want to fund the making of the work. So they had a budget, and I think at the time they invested almost more than 200,000 USD to produce the work. So they flew me there. We selected the objects, bought it. We took it to a place in Philly, a metal workshop, and they fabricated the entire thing together. And then we went to the railway line. We selected a place because I was interested in the Statue of Liberty, and also in connection to some of the old sugar factories in New York, where the train line used to go into the factory and all that. So we mounted the work at that juncture where you could see the factory and also the Statue of Liberty with a torch on the top. So after everything, and also they had to close entire streets in New York in order to be able to mount this work because they needed heavy cranes and others to make it happen. And after that, they asked me, we want to give the work back to we want to give the object back to the place that we bought it so that they'll recycle it and all that. And I said, but I want it in Ghana. Because as an artist, when you make a work, it's yours. But they didn't have budget at that time because they were in a new year. So I told, okay, fine, I'll pay for it to be brought here. And this thing cannot go in a container. No. So what we have to do is that we have to put it in a ship, just somewhere. And when you're putting something in a ship which is not a container, the price is different. If a container is 4,000, the price could be 5 times the amount. So I ended up spending almost 30,000 USD just to ship this thing to come here. But this thing is so important because when you're looking at this in relation to the history of my work, 50 years to come, when you're thinking about, let's say, the work that the artist did, now they are not thinking that, he did one important work in New York he got lost. Or, it was left in America. Now it's somewhere here. So redistribution. Now the memory is no longer in relation to America, but also here. But also when you think about the life of this object, also think about it in such a way that when, during the era of slavery, when the slave raiders will come here, and then they will take people from the villages here and all that. They will take them to Salaga, through the Mampong, other places to the coast, Cape Coast and others. They will put them in a boat. They will send them to the Americas. And then they would work in the plantations, cotton, sugar, whatever. The wealth that created modern wealth was what built America. And then the wealth of modern America is used to build modern systems like this. And then now we buy it through art, and then we make a work out of it, and then we put it in a boat, and then we ship it all the way back here. So it's an entire cycle. There's an entire lake. So when we're talking about restitution, the white people stole our objects and all that. All these things which might not be directly related to it are all part of the restitutions.
It looks like a torch.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, the Statue of Liberty, exactly. But as an artist, if you see it ordinarily, you don't see it. But that's where the power of art is, to be able to see things and then read other meanings into it that normally you would not be able to read. It took me many years to make that connection. But you have to go back to the same place again and again and again and again. One day, something might happen that allows you to see it, to see that connection. So, this is also amazing. And this tank, you realize that there are echoes, it makes its own sound, and yeah. So that could also inspire other things, like building sound recording studios underground with tanks that make echoes, recording special types of sound.
At our National Museum, there's only one engine. You know that one at Accra, outside?
Yeah, exactly.
One engine.
Yeah.
This is like a transport.
So far back there, you see that there's a density of forest here. So all that land is still part of ours.
Nice.
And those are areas where they used to bury some of our ancestors, like the kings and others. And people don't cut trees there. You know, here, each time there's a childbirth, they come and they cut a tree. Because they say that if you cook for the baby with a tree that you've cut, that's why there's deforestation and all that. But in the forest, they'll never go there because they say that the ghosts of the ancestors are in the forest. So I bought it from them in order to be able to extend the educational models into it. Imagine we're teaching school kids in the greenhouse in relation to, let's say, the forest area, the ghosts, blah, 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 all those things. Even building, let's say, bird nests or tree houses. so you are planting like regeneration and all that. So it also allows for regeneration, not just in terms of the land, but also in terms of the mind again. So I like creating these connections. So that forest area, there are several of them around the city, and I've negotiated so far, bought about 5 of them so far. Some of them are large on like a bit of hilly tops. When you're there, you can see like forest areas and all that, the landscape. So why can't we turn them into like picnic grounds? Because people come here to do picnics and all that.
Yeah.
But I'm also interested in how they can go to the forest to do a picnic, where the people in the village, you employ someone who knows the history of the place, and when people come, they can tell them about the history of the village in relation to like the formation of it, blah, blah, blah. All those things are very important. Even the food that they eat, blah, blah, blah. So just the gesture of making that intervention opens up a whole new possibility. So the other line, the line that you see, the train line, is going to go through the landscape, go through a building, come back here. In the future, there will be another railway line here. But these lines are going to be used for, these trains are going to be used for accommodation spaces and all that. Okay. Some of them will have like music recording studios or studios in them. We'll have our own FM channel where we just do interviews of like artists, creatives, just dedicated to creatives, podcasts, other things. But I like the idea that the inside of the train, which was left to rot, die. This train is from Huni Valley.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, one of the first places that a railway line was built in the early 20th century. So we realized the rust and other things. So we are welding them. We started a welding recently. We are welding them gradually. We're removing the entire interior so that we rebuild everything. There are toilets in it which don't exist anymore. But we're going to put modern toilets in it and also modern shower systems and all that. So each carriage will be divided into 2. And then we'll have 2 rooms in them.
Would you like to keep one of them in that indigenous original state?
No, we are keeping all in original state, the outside. He says that we are just repairing them so they are safe to live in. But the interior will be made with wood.
Like I'm wondering, like you said, maybe you might replace the toilets, and the toilet they have there.
Most of the toilets don't exist in them. There were a lot of things had been robbed from it before we even got them. Because they've been in the bush for like 2-3 decades.
So you bought them?
I bought them, yeah. They were going to cut them into scraps.
So when interestingly, I was born in Christian.
Okay.
Parents brought me from Christian to Accra, but I don't have a memory of me still in the train before. So this is
it's in Tamale that you.
yes.
Yeah. The trains that we use in Canada, the original trains from like the 50s, and they just renovate the interior.
Yes.
But it also makes
They're very
braking
beautiful trains.
systems
Yeah.
and everything kind of slow.
Yeah.
So it's an interesting
Yeah.
contradiction.
Yeah.
Sometimes you walk into the original train and you're like, why
Yeah.
does this look like? There's still a place for your briefcase.
Yes,
and
exactly.
Your,
Those trains are so beautiful.
your hats.
Yeah.
Like
They're so beautiful.
they're beautiful. Yeah.
They're like objects. You know, it's not like modern things, like modern cars are just flashy. But old cars, the design, the model, everything was like really thought of, you know.
I mean, we observed the Benz over there.
my special Benz. I have another one which is even older. It's from the early 50s. I'm restoring it, and it will take 1 year to restore it. So I like that thing where you buy something old and you take even 1 year, 2 years to bring it back to life. Little by little. So the one of here we're going to push the trains, and in the middle we're going to have like a train carriage, or like I'm also trying to play with like the idea of containers, where we're going to create like, let's say, a food court, a restaurant, and then this whole area we're going to dig an artificial lake. So we're going to, so once we have a water body here, it means that all plant lives can grow throughout. We'll start, other things will start growing and all that, water lilies, whatever. So we'll build also we'll build the restaurants, which will extend also into like the lake and all that, so that at least when you're there, even on the platform, you can be able to, for instance, dip your foot into the water, things like that. Before I was thinking about a swimming pool, but later I realized that no, maybe I might build a pool elsewhere, but here I'll just make everything organic and just make a lake where maybe we'll leave some of the trees around it, like, you know, the Lake Holm Botanical Gardens, where you can even take a small boat and go around. So you even realize that we have a boat, and now I have some smaller boats even in Accra and all that. So all those experiences, but it takes time, Charlie. All these things, they're money, cost.
That is what I'm going to ask you. For how long are you planning to execute all these people. At least we all have a target. Maybe up to this year, I need to achieve.
Oh, me, I don't. I just do it. It's a lifetime work. Maybe I'll do it till I'm 100. If God blesses me with old life, why not? Maybe at some point you might be tired and someone else will take over. But the idea is that we keep on building. And also we have a whole community of people that we're working with. And the idea is that people are supposed to also encapsulate this spirit, and it should inspire them to take other responsibilities and all that. There are things that maybe I might not be able to realize. Someone else, a child who is growing up here might be inspired that in the future they might come and then they might become the director of the institution or build other spaces in the future and do other things and all that. So it's like a seed. You planting a seed, but then when it's blossoming, it can sprout and then there'll be other seeds, things that will be born out of it. Yeah.
Return, yeah, I was curious about this.
So some of them, because the trains were customized, they have the numbers, Ghana Railway, GDR. So most of these trains were made in the east part of Germany. So it also comes with all the histories together with it, the socialist histories and everything. When the coup happened, after that, Rollins was also one of the people that invested a lot into the railway at the time. We bought a lot of trains that we used. So I really like this idea of like thinking about where these trains are coming from. Also in relation to the history of Germany, the partition and all that. Also in relation to our own history here. So the dates are very important for us to also think about. There was a publication I made some years ago, and I just used to go to the railway, photographing the dates and then the text on it. At the time, I didn't even know when I was applying, I didn't even know one day it would be possible to get the trains. Yeah. So there's an exhibition I'm going to do in Europe one of these days where I'm going to take some of the trains, some of the other ones that I'm getting to present. So I'm going to ship them from here back to Europe to present within a museum and then bring them back. Yeah. Yeah. For me, moving things is not an issue. Yeah, you can move anything anywhere. After all, they were brought here even times when technologies hadn't developed. But now that we can try, yeah, exactly. Yeah. So but this one was made in Poland. At the time when the Soviet Union was becoming. Yes. So this is a scar. Yeah, the idea of scarification. So this thing, all this train, everything had been cut into parts. So Sakite, even at the time I was away, I was in Portugal. So my uncle, I have an uncle that I work with. When you came, I was talking to a gentleman outside. So normally he's the one that organizes all of this transporting. Though I might go and join them with a truck when we're bringing these things. I was with them in the car. Like for 5 days on the road. I wanted to witness everything. The planes, I always just want to see everything. People's reactions, the comments. I would film it with a drone, camera, whatever. Recently I brought in some filmmakers to also film other aspects of it and all that. We might not produce anything out of it now, but then eventually you know that you have the material and you can work with it in any form that you want. Yeah, so the idea of welding this train back together again is quite an interesting one. And the scar represents quite a lot. Because normally when there is a scar, we think of it as it's more or less like a defect from something which was damaged and repaired. But I like to think of it as a promise. Yeah, because we going through all this trouble to bring the welders to weld it back together again and to lift the train and to put it on a truck, bring it all the way here. And this train in the future is going to be used for a moving classroom. So I'm customizing a truck, like those trucks that transport things. But the back of it will just be the train on a truck, a trailer truck, with a railway line and everything. And then we'll have an accommodation space attached to it. So an artist, an engineer, a chef, whoever, can do a residency in it for a month or 2 months. You live in it. It goes across different spaces. There's going to be a telescope in it that can be able to observe, let's say, other galaxies and other things. There's going to be a generator in it that can empower, let's say, an entire village or whatever. There's going to be children's books and other things in it. So the train comes bearing what? Gifts, as the gifts economy that I was talking about. So the scar, which you can think of as just as the scar in relation to the body, like the boxes, the kayas and everything, this time around it comes bearing gifts. It comes bearing gifts of the cosmos, gifts of the universe, of mystery, all these things. So imagine you go to a village where kids, like, they've never seen these things before, or even like there are no schools in those villages, there's no electricity, in the night sky is pitch black. But at the same time, when you take this there and then there is generator, there's a cinema, you can project movies for them to watch, you can do workshops and other things. Imagine the possibilities that come out from that. You can observe the stars. So for me, I'm interested in the possibilities that are born out of crisis and the scars within history. So normally I like to end here so that we will look, when we go into the archive, you can look at like drawings, because I have all my notebooks there also, so you can see how the thoughts have developed over years and all that.
You were saying something there and I just missed it a bit. Your grandfather's story about walking
from Accra, from Tamale all the way to Accra to work for the British. And a lot of people also walked from here to go and then work in the mines and others. But today we are bringing these from that system here. And you realize like ecology, like realize there's a plant growing. Things grow.
Nature will eventually.
Exactly. So that's where my point always is in. It's about the resilience also of nature, of time and all that. Because now, 100 years ago, my grandfather would have never thought that his grandson will come and come and will bring an object like this here and then build new systems out of it and all that. And I don't imagine what this will produce, let's say, in the next 100 years again.
But this guy is a promise of.
It's a promise of what is to come. Though it's a dent on our history and the failures that are yet to come, but it's also a promise of time. So we have to think of it that way. I wish that children will be taught philosophy in school. Because it really helps you to think beyond the common sense. Ghana, that's the thing that is killing us. Oh, Uncle, you say, but it doesn't work that way. Common sense. It's not. The world is not run by common sense. Sometimes you need to think about things that they don't make sense at all. It's stupid, but it's through those stupid forms that opens up new forms of liberation. Radicality can be born in any form. It's just that the consciousness, that's where we haven't gotten to. We are not conscious enough. So we ignore things a lot.
For me, the creative scene, and I think I was telling you, the creative scene in Ghana is very special. You don't see it in other cities like where I'm from that have been other cities. I say cities because that's where creatives tend to meet and be. Other major cities in the world beyond Accra, I guess, you see like creatives being pushed out through gentrification and also just like the culture of capitalism and the focus on making money and growth and finance pushes anything that isn't in the name of profit out. So it's something that I'm admiring, and I see the radical nature of people here being through the creative scene. You don't even the festivals, the art festivals you see here, or the culinary world, like everything, the music, everything seems to be with the creative sense and not necessarily with the intention of making money. You don't see that in other places, or it's disappearing. And I think it's very special to hold on to. So maybe when we think about how like radicalization or political mobilization around food comes, maybe in this context should be channeled through art. Maybe that's one way to have it be accepted. I don't know, I'm just reflecting based on our conversations with the researchers yesterday. You know, can we get past the party politics through art, for example?
What's the name of this place?
Red Clay.
Sorry, that's right, Red Clay. I'm trying to see how far there I can. Red Clay, that's right.
Yes, Red Clay.
Why that name? What inspired that name?
It's the soil. You know, the soil here. Iron ore. There's a lot of iron ore in the soil here. So that's how come the name came about. But also, Yusuf Indo, he has a song called Red Clay. It's part of an album called From Village to Town. So why from village to town? Sometimes the city can learn from the village. Nkrumah, during one of the Legon graduations, inaugural graduations, back in the day, he said that I think it is time for the gown to go to town. So for the gown to go to town, for the people, the elites, the people who are educated to go to town, to influence, to be influential there, to learn systems, blah, blah, blah. So we did an exhibition at the Science Museum years ago where we named it "The Gown Must Go to Town" based on that Nkrumah's speech. But it's interesting that based on what we are doing here, it can inspire. Like even you would go to Accra and other places and you will not find these ideas or these systems, but it's in a village somewhere. So that's what my proposal is, that based on rural areas and other things, there are things that can exist in those areas that can come back to re-inspire the city and also open up other forms. So in Yusuf Ndo's song, the lyrics goes like this: red clay on the road, searching for his soul. So it's like we're searching for a soul through the building, through the ground, through the soil, through the color, everything.
Fantastic. Well done, well done.
Thank you.
My only fear is when you mentioned that there are elements of iron ore around. You know, for the politicians, when they get that quickly, they...
Oh, no. Iron ore has been in the soil for centuries. Our people were making spears out of it and all that. The British were not interested in iron ore. They already had so much of it in England. They wanted the gold and other things. And here also, you might not find maybe... they have not even created any company that does all these years. But recently, when they found gold in Bolga, you see that they already started legal. So it's also about the value that they attach to certain things. So
we had an open man, so iron ore deposits.
From the old railway, the original cabinets that the British made back in the early 20th century, so 1901 to 1920. Some of the documents, archives, this was where they used to store the tools in. These are some of the original railway sleepers that some of the first trains were going on. But I'm also interested in the rust, the termites, the wear and tear, the histories that they come along with. And how we can combine that together with, let's say, new systems of histories and labor, things like that. The scars that we're looking on the inside, the scars you can also see here on the hands of the Kayis again. So, you see, these are the original train parts that were being burnt. So, if you look at the mark, you realize that they are like the scarification on the body. So I was also looking at the relationship between those. So this is one. I printed these around the same time when we made the work for, what's the name? I went to buy the tank at the back from Texas. This is the same time. I printed this in Chicago at the art school of Institute. So Ghana, we don't have systems like this, like special art print. They are all things that we need to build in the future. You realize these ones are maps, old British maps, the Gold Coast maps and all that. All the things that I've also saved over time. Some of those maps are also here. So what's the relationship between the body, the tattoo, in relation to like the old railway lines, like footpath, travel paths. Maybe my grandfather would have walked through some of these territories in order to get to the south. So the histories are intertwined, yeah.
Even how diviners read the...
Yes, exactly. Exactly.
Contours.
Yeah.
So there's a Brazil.
Yes. So the name of the girl that this is been to.
Okay, so why the other names?
Grandfather, aunties, sometimes the town.
Even the fingerprints look like contour lines.
Yes, because of the detail of the photography, so it opens up all possibilities. And there are museums all around the world that have these works, but mostly they are on walls. But for here, I like them to be both on the wall and in the cabinet, so you can also discover it as you go through. It's not everything that is meant to be just there for you to see. Sometimes you also have to work through to see them. So all these cabinets contain different photographs, and we also have some here. So this one is very fragile. This is from Gihok. So when I was collecting the things from the factory back in those days, So this is the paint factory that existed back then. So these pictures are from the 50s. You can see how they are taken. They're very good. Silver gelatin prints. In Ghana, you almost not find anyone making this kind of photography anymore. You find them in their archives and all that. But studios that were producing this, most of them are dead. The laboratory where the paints were made, industrial paints. So they were making household paints and all that. So I collected all these things because they had abandoned all that in the factory.
Pictures have a lot of detail.
Yeah. A lot of detail. Large format. So the cans that they were making. So imagine, this is Ghana. This is independence.
And all those things.
Yes.
We were putting them in jars.
Yeah.
The name, this company name looks similar like the other one.
No, it's the same.
This Ghana Industrial Corporation. That's Gayhawk. Yeah. That's Gayhawk. We had different divisions.
Gayhawk, the Gayhawk, I knew of the...
So imagine all this work, mixing paint.
Azam paint price is just a small one.
Charlie?
No, they just came yesterday.
That's why it's Azam paint. So you see the scales that were at the back. So I went around collecting all those old scales because they sold them to scrap dealers, and I'll go and buy them back from scrap dealers.
An old cocoa,
Yes. So there are a lot of images in relation to this. The archives, as I said. What we have here is there is very little compared to the archives and things that I've built over time.
I think this one you can probably
For now, once the photographs themselves are protected, the kente also, we have different ones that I've collected from villages, Ewe, Ashanti, silk, different types. And recently I went to do an entire collection of kente again from the art center. There's a man who collects kentes that are as old as 100 years and whatever. He restores them and all that. So I went there and I made a selection. I made him collect different kentes for me from all around. Yeah. So if you have, let's say, 1,000 kente cloths combined with, let's say, smocks from here, from Burkina. Now, imagine even when you have a textile school, the kind of histories that you can...
It's an international archive.
Exactly. So that's what I do. I just go around looking for things to collect and then preserve. So here you have notebooks, and these notebooks, you have, let's say, drawings that I would make as we are building the spaces, the parliament, like when we're building it, like thinking about the different forms that could emerge from it, like so details of things, like thinking about architecture. So I collect things like KNUSC, the old library, they were throwing the things away. I would collect them. I was driving in Trabodom and I saw some old TVs there and radios. I'll stop and then buy it, negotiate. So for me, when I'm looking at different things. This in 2020 around COVID. Yeah. So there are so many different points. So these are some of the drawings of drone shots of thinking about the composition of the land, the infrastructure, the parliament around the time when we're building March 2020. So this is 2nd, the railway. Location. So this from 2018. The bricks that you're talking about, the brick system. So I will go and then I was interested in the brick systems and all that and how we could reinvent them.
Never gave him the rights.
So you see, so 2018, the desk and all that from different timelines, looking at steel beams from old factories and all that. Some of them are works that are not realized yet. So this is the parliament when we're building. So before the desk, I was thinking about it in the library area, so we had to remove it. The cinema was somewhere else with the photography space I was talking about, the blackboards. So when you have an idea, it will shift and take a different form. Even the greenhouse was always meant to be like a collection space for artworks and all that, but then we decided to make it into a greenhouse. So the idea is just to start with something and change it. And the beds of dreams were the cement papers. It started off as mattresses and other things, and then it evolved into the cement papers and all that. So this in March 2020, when COVID had just started. So writing letters to the railways over and over again, which never really happened. Yeah. So thinking about ways in which the greenhouse will be used, partitioned, but today it's just a greenhouse. The maps again. So even before getting the trains, this was the last train we're looking at, the Henschel, the big one. These are blueprints of it, the inside. and all that.
These archives.
Yes. All the cabinets you see there contain all the trains that were used in Ghana, both from both and north to the last one, all the archives. Because I took a long time, their blueprints, I took a long time to collect all of them.
Wow.
Yeah, I took a long time.
Working class, yes.
Yeah.
There's a lot of detail.
Yeah. So making, like thinking. So now we're thinking about the lake here, the train is here. But first, I thought about building like a children's park, merry-go-round with the yellow and other things. But today we have the railway line that's going to run instead. Yeah. So this is the Parliament area. So this is in early 2020. So imagine between early 2020 and now, how many years is that?
Yeah, it's 3 years.
It's 3 years. So imagine all this work that we've just going. It's 3 years work. Yeah, it's 3 years work. So these are the old bricks in Tekendi when they were making them and all that. So there are so many forms, so many possible forms that are made. Like sometimes even when you're making your work, like the boxes and all that, some of these are like drawings I would make of it in the beginning. I like this idea that art presents all kinds of possibilities in terms of how we think about forms and all that. So whilst you are thinking about that, you're also designing other systems in the same time. But all of this is just meant to make things very ordinary. I did a project at the National Theatre where I covered the entire building with the cocoa sacks. So these were the drawings that I was making for it back in the day, like going to the theatre, making drawings on it. The way the light is coming from, where the shadows are, the wind direction, all those things, the dimensions, so that the building, we could do the materials to be accurate and calculate. All those things were done back in those days.
Wow.
Yeah. And I published it in a book, actually, Exchange Exchanger. And at the same time when I was building, I was making the National Theatre drawings. In 2015-16, this is when we started building this space. So I was drawing, this is where we are now, this space. I was making drawings of the building also. So it's like you are working, you are in Accra, you are doing a project, but you're also thinking about this at the same time. So I like the idea that the mind works within those frames. Yeah. And at the time, this was just the land. This is where the plane is, the big one in the middle. There was a road in between. There was no other land. So when I started buying all the lands around, then we collapsed all the spaces and it became one. Yeah. This is from which date? Yeah, early 2016. Yeah.
The artist.
Yeah, he's coming here on Sunday actually.
Oh wow. Okay, we'll talk about it in the car.
So these are from the railways again, 2017. Going there, looking at the trains, the restorations, and one of our centers. I was looking at the railway. So the railway also inspired the way I built this space. So thinking of building the spaces and what it is. So 2018. So you see the same. It's in the same timeline. So I like to go between different spaces as I'm building. But in our generation, so you see, so around the same time. And this space wasn't so big. So I'd even go to like, so you see when the original work was made in, what's the name, in Germany, 2018. Yeah. Going to like, this is in Malta, Germany, like looking at churches and how the hallways are, how they could influence the air, the openness of it. That's my father. He's an engineer, so he helps us a lot with building and all that.
Okay.
Yeah. So thinking about the expansion. This is where we are at the back. My neighbor saw the land to us. This is when we started doing that. Yeah, early 2018.
And this all in 2018?
Yes, this is just recent. It's not so long ago. It's recent. It's recent history. Even if it's just in the last 10 years. Imagine building this in the last 10 years. And the entire country, since Nkrumah was overthrown.
We haven't moved that. We're actually living on that old legacy.
The legacy.
No, not anything.
So there are so many things else. I collect all kinds of things. If you notice the archive where in the drawing, one of the trains with the white men, there was an old steam engine. So this is the lights from that old steam engine. This is one of the few things left from the pre-independence days. All the trains you see are coming from the post-independence period. So these lights and all that, I thought they were really interesting. Yeah. And the skills. I got all these things from villages. Yeah. Around in Sawam and all that.
Have you used this iron before?
I tell you. Hey, the whole pose.
The question is that have they insulted you with a box iron before? Like a head like box iron.
One chapel just go for
Uniform for what
All these are fire systems like lights, lanterns, and
this kind of board. The design.
this is the very last object, and then I'm going to disappear to finish my proposal. So these smocks, you realize that we wear smocks here, but the smocks that we wear, I'm also really interested in the history of the smock, the qualities of the smock, what it does. Because you know, when we wear them over time, when they are torn, because they are passed on from one generation to the other, they patch them up, they restitch them and all that. They never throw them away. Because again, like the forest and others, people believe that their spirits are attached and embedded into it. So when someone is going to give you one of these smokes, they either have to pee on it or they have to smear human excrement on it. Because they believe that's the only way to desacralize and detach the soul from it. But as an artist, I even think it's more interesting because they're even adding more history to it. It stains it. So the interior, you realize that there are some like yellow colors and other things. For me, aesthetically, it's even more interesting. So some of the current works that I'm producing out of textiles, I'm using some of the old materials, which extends the idea of the archive, historical archive, into the public realm, rather than being in an ethnographic museum. When you go to the British Museum, all these materials that they have there are in glass cases and all that. But I like to think of it as something that is open. After all, we wear it and we are outside. So why is it that in a museum it has to be in a glass case? So I ask questions through those forms. Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah. So some of the trumpets, you know, they're down. We have musical instruments, the gramophones. I've collected them from villages. And some of the gramophones contain some of the original speeches, Nkrumah's original speeches. I collected those from old villages and all that. And some of the early music that is made on these, for the things, the musicians would have used some of these trumpets for that. So when I'm collecting the musical, like the objects, I look for everything that is connected to it. So there are people who, in Ghana, people are wild though. There are people who go around and collect things and just keep them. If you go to people's homes sometimes, the kind of things they have in villages, under their beds and all that. So I've always thought that under the bed of someone in a village is an entire universe buried there. So there's an exhibition which I'm doing in Slovenia, which is titled From the Void Came the Gifts of the Cosmos. And it's because I was looking at that in relation to this idea that under the bed of someone in the village, under the silo, the bunker, underneath the box and everything, is buried an entire universe of memories and ideas. It's a whole cosmological form. Okay, thank you very much. Okay, this one is a jet engine. This engine was given to us by Ibrahim Mahama. Yeah, John Mohammed's brother. Yeah, so yes, exactly. So in 2000, last year, we met for the first time, and he was telling me how he had been following the work I was doing, and he knew about the planes and everything. But getting these jet engines are very expensive and very difficult. All the planes I bought that had these jet engines, they are taking them out before I bought them, because these are very expensive. Sometimes they sell for millions of dollars. But his old jets, before he bought the current one, they were going to decommission it. And then he gave me one of it, together with some other objects and all that. So even some of the furniture that I use here are the old furnitures from his jets that he used to sit on when he was traveling. So he gave me all those seats. Yeah. And the kids, when we're teaching them about drone tech and all these things, coding and all that, we need to be able to connect that to these forms. So what's the relationship between this and then the propeller? Because this propeller is coming from the old CityLink aircraft. And that CityLink aircraft was the first aircraft that was used in the aviation industry after Ghana Airways here. That was the foundation for the local airline here. And the captain of the airline and the one who's trained most of the African world pilots today is Captain Azu. He has a piloting school in Accra too.